Hello and welcome to this history tutorial on the Spanish Armada. This is for Edexcel GCSE History, Elizabethan England. Today we will cover Philip's plan, the key events of the Spanish Armada, and we will also look at the reasons for its failure. By the spring of 1588, the Spanish Armada was complete and Philip was ready to launch his enterprise of England and overthrow Protestantism in England. The Spanish Armada was a huge fleet of around 130 ships, manned by approximately 8,000 sailors and carrying an estimated 18,000 soldiers. The plan was for the Armada, led by the Duke of Medina Sidonia, to sail through the English Channel to Calais. The Duke of Parma was to march his army from the Netherlands to Calais, and here he was to meet up with the Spanish fleet, board the ships and sail for England. The fleet was to land in Kent and then march on London. It was hoped that English Catholics would rise up against Elizabeth in England, forcing her to surrender, and Catholicism could then be restored in England. However, things didn't go as planned for the Spanish. The Armada set out in May 1588, but was delayed by several weeks due to bad weather. In July, the Spanish fleet was sighted off the Cornish coast, and beacons were lit along the south coast to warn of the impending attack. English ships left Plymouth to face the Armada and opened fire on the Armada on the 31st of July, capturing 2 Spanish ships. The English fleet had kept a safe distance from the Spanish Armada and chased the Spanish down the English Channel. The Armada had sailed in a crescent formation, which was an effective defensive strategy that used the larger armed galleons to protect the smaller vessels. There were some exchanges of heavy cannon fire off the Isle of Wight on the 3rd and 4th of August, which proved useful for the English. Medina Sidonia had hoped to anchor safely off the Isle of Wight to give the Duke of Parma the time needed to get to Calais to meet the fleet. Not being able to do this meant that when the Spanish Armada reached Calais, the Duke of Parma was not ready. During the Battle of the Isle of Wight, the English had been able to fire as many as 6 times more cannonballs than the Spanish, and from further away. This gave the English fleet a clear advantage. Having sailed up the Channel, Medina Sidonia anchored the Spanish Armada at Calais to await the Duke of Parma and his army. However, Parma had been delayed and his troops did not reach Medina Sidonia and the Armada in time. On the night of the 6th of August, the English sent 8 fireships among the Armada. This sent panic through the Spanish fleet and the sailors cut their anchor cables, breaking the defensive crescent formation and headed for the open sea. The Spanish ships regrouped at Gravelines, but the weather made it impossible for them to return to their defensive position. The English moved in on the Spanish and successfully sank 5 ships. The remainder of the Spanish fleet were forced to sail away into the North Sea. The English followed the Spanish as far north as Scotland to make sure they were not able to regroup. The Spanish were forced to return home through the treacherous waters off the Scottish and Irish coasts. Thousands were killed as a result. So why was the Armada defeated? Well, one reason has to be English tactics. The fact that the English fleet always maintained a safe distance from the Spanish fleet and the use of fireships was key. This helped the English defeat the Spanish Armada because although the fireships did very little damage to the fleet, they created havoc and scattered the Armada. Some Spanish ships were even forced to cut their anchors, making it impossible for them to wait in the Channel and meet the Duke of Parma's army. The fireships succeeded in breaking the Armada's crescent formation and made them easier to attack, as the English ships could now get amongst them. When the English ships had chased the Armada down the Channel, they had stayed a safe distance and successfully avoided being boarded. But now the English ships got much closer to the Spanish, they could do much more damage with their cannons. The English fleet also had several strengths. The English fleet contained 24 new galleons and could use its cannons more effectively. This helped them to defeat the Spanish because the English galleons were faster and easier to maneuver than the Spanish ships. This was a huge advantage during the Battle of Gravelines and helped the English to turn their cannon on the Spanish much quicker, allowing them to defeat the Armada and leave it at the mercy of the wind. The Spanish had little chance against the English cannons, which had enough space to recoil and be quickly reloaded before being pushed back to the gun port. This enabled the English to fire 6 times more cannonballs than the Spanish and from further away, whereas the Spanish were low on cannonballs and those that they had were of poor quality. To make things worse, the Spanish had more priests on board than trained gunners and struggled to even fight back. You also have to look at some of the poor decision making from the Spanish. The plan itself was too complicated and having to meet up with the Duke of Parma proved costly. Remember, the plan had been for the Duke of Parma to march his army of 20,000 to meet the Armada at Calais. This helped cause the defeat of the Armada because it meant that when the Armada anchored off Calais to meet up with the Duke of Parma, they became an easy target for the English fleet. As the Spanish didn't control any deep-water seaports in the English Channel, they had no choice but to wait out in open sea, which left them exposed to English fireships. As communication was so difficult by sea, the Duke of Parma had only just received word from the Duke of Medina Sidonia when the Armada arrived at Calais, so was nowhere near ready. Although they didn't know this at the time, this gave the English plenty of time and opportunity, as it would be days before Parma's army arrived. In summary, a combination of factors meant that Philip's enterprise of England was not successful. The Spanish struggled with communication, which made them an easy target for the English, who had galleons which were faster and more manoeuvrable than the Spanish ships, and they were able to fire more cannonballs. The use of fireships at the Battle of Gravelines ensured that the Spanish fleet was panicked and scattered, leaving the wind to destroy the bulk of the fleet. Philip did actually send 2 further armadas in the 1590s, but both were unsuccessful. Spain's defeat in 1588 contributed to England's development as a strong naval power. To get further help, visit history.outwood.com, see your teacher in school, or check out quiz.outwood.com for those sweet revision quizzes. You can also follow the Outwood Humanities team on Twitter @OGATHumanities. Until next time, that was a little bit of history.